All right, looks like we're ready to get going. I'd like to start by thanking everyone for coming to our webinar today. Today, we're going to have a really interesting discussion on mental health and wellness and how hospitals can actually make an impact on that through innovation, through technology. I'm really excited to have you all join us today. Just some introductions. I'd like to start by, introducing Betty Jo, our speaker today. I want to say hello.
Hi, guys. Thank you. I'm looking at the chat too, so I can see you guys chatting some things out during, so I'll try to talk and read at the same time, but it's a pleasure to be here with you today. For those of you who know me in the industry a little bit, you know that nursing is near and dear to my heart, but so is technology and analytics. And so I've been focusing my career here for the last 2.5 or 3 years on using that technology to improve mental health of our nurses across the board, even nationally. So it's important that we have flexible options for our nurses today, as well as take a look at it from their perspective on what they've been through during the pandemic. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today, but it's a pleasure to be with you and looking forward to your questions.
Awesome, thanks. And just to introduce myself, my name is Alex. I've been at Trusted I joined last year. And I come from the technology side. My background has been, throughout my whole career, finding industries that are in serious need of disruption and looking at the kinds of solutions that, may not be as, exciting on the surface, but are solving real problems for the industry and looking at, some of the industries, especially that may have been left behind. I think, we all know that healthcare has a way to go on the technology and innovation front. And it's been really exciting to see over the last few years, companies taking some pretty big swings in trying to bring, best in class innovation to the market. So that's what drew me to healthcare and drew me in particular to Trusted. Today, what we're going to talk about, just so kind of a run through, we'll talk about some of the workforce trends that we're seeing across the board. And why now is the time that making mental health a focus is more important than ever before. We'll look at some of the shifts in thinking that hospitals and healthcare systems need to make to actually address the problem. There's been a lot of kind of Band-Aid solutions and things that we've been trying, but if we're really rethinking it from the ground up, what are some innovative new approaches that we can take? And then finally, we'll talk through. Betty Jo's been working on a full workforce transformation project at Mercy for a while now and had some really exciting and interesting results. So we'll talk a little bit about specifically what are some of the things that she's implemented, what are some of the things that she's seeing, what are some of the success metrics and kind of next steps, and how has it made an impact on the actual health and wellness of the workforce at Mercy. So that's what we'll go into. We'll leave some time for Q&A as well. So there is a Q&A box, that you can put questions in, or feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll take some time at the end to address them. And finally, some of you may or may not be aware, but we, in the spirit of mental health and wellness, one person who is registered to come to this webinar will be receiving a $3,500 vacation. So, hopefully. Pass along a little bit of the mental health benefits to people that come today. So that's the plan. Just to kind of kick off, me please. To kick off, just to tell you a little bit about Trusted and who we are. So we began our journey a while ago as the leading labor marketplace for healthcare professionals, looking at solving some of the challenges that hospitals and clinicians are facing in terms of finding that right job, that right fit, and then helping healthcare systems find employees that meet better within their costs. So that's how we started. We've been really honored to have some really exciting client partners and national relationships. We're based out of San Francisco, and our newest project that we've been working on for about a year is Works. So we started by helping nurses go through a more efficient process to finding that, that next job. And then what we really realized is that, there's a huge gap in hospitals in being able to actually achieve that flexibility to enable bringing in the right nurse at the right cost at the right time. So, recognizing that hospitals are in desperate need of more creative ways to staff and manage their shifts. So, that's really hard with the technology that there is today. And, given all of our experience in the industry, we built a platform to help people attack that problem so that they can actually identify the demand that they have within their hospital and go between their workforce layers to find the right nurse at the right cost to fit into that shift. So that's a little bit about us. And, we'll jump right into the discussion. So, kicking it off, I think the most important thing to discuss is, why now? Obviously, we can say, pandemic, but there's a lot of other factors that are leading hospitals to really focus on needing to make that change. I think just the stats alone are a little bit alarming. Even outside of COVID, the U.S. Bureau of Labor predicts that there's going to be, over 3 million shortfall in supply of healthcare workers by the time we get to 2026. So, even as COVID, the urgency of COVID kind of fades away, we know that the problem of supply of healthcare professionals is not going to fade away. And then just talking with Betty Jo, there's been a 25% increase in national turnover. So it's not just about finding new talent. It's not just about a dwindling supply of new people coming into the market. It's people actually leaving the workforce. And it's that kind of constant change of not being able to keep the hospital fully staffed. And, I'll kick it off to you, Betty Jo. Is this something that you were seeing and experiencing? What's kind of your take on this?
Well, yes, absolutely. And we all are, right? If you are a chief nursing officer or anywhere around clinical labor today, during the pandemic, we did see everybody rise in turnover rates. The question is, how's it going to come back down? And if it does come back down, what's that workforce going to look like? And making sure we're planning for the needs of that workforce rather than looking at that turnover as our specific focus, because turnover will come down if we're meeting needs for sure. So, Mercy's a little bit under that average. Right now, we're about 23, 24%. So we're sitting right underneath there. But, when you look at turning over a fourth of your workforce, that's a heavy lift. And the turnover is more burdensome than actually not having those shifts filled because of all the orientation and onboarding. So figuring out with our nurses leading the way, the right way to tackle this is going to be key. And, we started working on it before the pandemic. We never stopped working on it. But now we're in a spot where we're starting operationally to be able to get back on track. So this is very timely. I think it's going to offer a lot of good advice today. I want to hear, from the panelists as well as the audience on what their take on this is. So it'll be an interesting conversation for sure.
One of the things that I, wonder about, and I think when we've talked to, other folks, there is in some groups a sense that a lot of this is simply pandemic driven and that there will be some return to normal, and of course there will be some, normalization, but how much of your concern in this area was driven by purely the pandemic, or, as you mentioned, this was something you were looking at, even prior. What kind of prompted your interest and concern and sense of, urgency around doing something here?
Well, just looking at what nurses are telling us. So they've been telling us for a long time. And if you look at the history of nursing, we've done a couple things in our history that has driven nursing to where it is today. And, not by, not on purpose, but when you take a look at what we've been concerned about, mental health and wellness for nursing has not always been on the forefront. Well, the pandemic just sped up that thinking. And so when you take a look at where we've been short for the last 10 years. It just didn't get to the level of noticing it at that national level. And now the pandemic really sped up a lot of this, and you'll see the turnovers up. So it was just like the perfect storm coming into this. But it's been on my radar for a long time that we're going to have to take a look at nursing care a little bit differently. So that's why we started the work on the workforce layers. And now we're just finishing that up and coming right out of the pandemic. Those that are ready to help nurses get back in a more flexible manner is going to be key. What we noticed during the pandemic, Alex, has been a couple things. Number one, nurses want flexibility, right, wrong, or indifferent. Our needs are not flexible. We have a 24/7, 365 need for nursing care. But what we do have to be flexible around is how we staff and schedule it. So we're going to have to take into account what nurses want. Do they want flexibility? Do they want more compensation? Do they want better work-life balance? All three of those things have to go into effect when you're taking a look at your workforce plan coming out of the pandemic.
I think that is a very fair point. And, actually we did a survey last year, just anecdotally, looking into that the same area, what outside of compensation, because I think one of the things that I think we've all realized is it's no longer enough to just throw money at the problem. And, we work a lot with travel nurses. We've had a lot of conversations with travel nurses and, why are they taking these shifts? Why are they moving? And I think, it's really easy to say, well, of course, travel jobs pay more money. But in a lot of the conversations we've had, nurses are they're not salespeople. They're not coin operated people. They're service oriented professionals that go into a field because they do care about things, outside of cash. That's not the main reason that someone goes to be a nurse, although of course, everyone needs money to live. So when we dug into it with, we interviewed almost 3,500 nurses last year and looking at what are the things that are really causing you to leave the bedside? What are some of the challenges that you're facing in your profession? It was really, this looking around and seeing that in other industries, people are working from home, people are having unlimited paid time off, all these benefits that, I think tech largely has brought in. And then you have professions like nurses where, they're still kind of stuck to very rigid schedules and, they don't feel like they have a lot of choice or opportunity. So, even for travel nursing, you talk to a young travel nurse in their early 20s and the idea of travel and excitement and more money is great. But, you talk to someone in their late 30s who might have a couple of kids and a family, it's not really sustainable for them to pick up and travel all over the country either. So, even that travel lifestyle, while it might pay more, I think there's a lot of people that we talk to who would take that flexibility, over cash in some cases, because, at some point, no matter how much money you're giving to someone, burnout is burnout. So that's, something that we've seen too, just from our own survey and study. So, I think I would imagine everyone here, is probably well familiar with the problem. So, I think the meat of our discussion and what's really exciting is kind of getting into, okay, so we know this is a challenge. Supply and demand is broken. What do we need to do to fix it? So, you and I have had a conversation about this previously. And, a lot of the points that you made, I think some of them were, even if the point itself might have been obvious, I think the way that you've been thinking about it at Mercy is very interesting and different. And I'll start with the concept of scheduling. I think that even the idea of kind of nurses starting with one linear path, they begin their career and they move through the hospital, and they work their careers a very specific way. I think that concept is changing just across the board. And, the idea of movement was particularly interesting to me when you were talking about how should hospitals be thinking about allowing nurses to change and move within their careers and within the hospital.
We're looking at it. And by the way, it's not just me. I have an incredible team that I work with that not only handles the mechanics of the workforce strategy you're going to hear about today, but the vision, the complete vision comes from talking to nurses, which is ironic because these are the people we're trying to serve, right? And so talking to them on the front lines and understanding where they are is very important. And there's such a concept that we're starting to embrace about the nursing workforce cycle, meaning not every nurse at every single stage wants the same things. We used to try to take a look at it within a generational focus, but even within that generational focus, people want different things. And we already talked about what they want. It's either flexibility, compensation, or some type of combination of both, right? And so when you go at it from that perspective, you're looking at a complete life cycle of a nurse. And if you're smart, you're looking at designing strategies that allow that nurse to stay within your health system, or if they're not in your health system, access what you have for collectible hours to get your demands met. So when you're taking a look at the health system side, it's about patient demand and hours, and it's about supply and hours. How you get that supply is your vision and strategy around workforce. And so taking a look at it from that perspective is going to be key. Now, the mental health piece of it comes in. How do you meet the needs of both the patients and your nurses who are providing that care? That's where the mental health comes in. And how you do it is through technology and analytics powering how you're thinking about that nursing life cycle. So it's in constant change, and one size doesn't fit all. So if we're smart as CNOs, we're taking a look at what that vision is around being flexible, 100%.
One of the things we talked about, I really did like that concept of sort of embracing change and embracing movement. And some of the things that contribute to burnout that people might not think about with regards to, I'm a nurse, I'm moving to a different unit, I'm moving to a different area of the hospital. And, why that might be hard or difficult to have to come in, learn new systems and things like that. It sounded like you're thinking about holistically how to standardize so that you can enable movement across the hospital and across the system in a way that reduces the impact of change. And I wonder if you could tell me a little bit more about how you're thinking about that.
Well, that's dropping down clear into the nursing work environment and the workflows and what each nurse experiences on their daily shift, right? We talk about a healthy work environment. That healthy work environment is high reliability to deliver patient care. And the way to do it is to standardize as much as possible within that work environment. So if you're going to be moving nurses around from unit to unit, hospital to hospital, with your workforce strategy, you have to account for the things in their daily path that are going to impede them being happy doing that. And one of them is that standardization that we talked about. So it's funny, it's even outside of nursing. So when you look back at where we've been focusing in Mercy for the last 8 or so years, it's really been around standardization. And it's not just nursing, it's supply chain standardization. It's our EMR or EHR standardization. So we've done a couple things that I think have been highly impactful. And one of them is build in safety measures around how we get supplies, our substitution logic, those type of things that have been impactful in our procedural area environment. And that's important because nurses have to know what to expect when they show up. And the more you can point them towards doing things the right way and disincentivizing things going the wrong way, the more safety is built in for that nurse and that patient. So that's been, our supply chain's been a huge piece of it. The other thing we've done in our nursing units is we use the same smart pumps throughout the entire health system. So all 45 hospitals have the same technology to deliver medications. We use the same medication scanning for safety. And we also utilize high preference items for nurses, such as IV catheters, standardized across our entire hospital system. So no matter where a nurse works, what unit they work, they can count on their documentation being the same, their tools and supplies being the same, and their preference items as much as possible being the same across our health system. And that's a huge amount of stress in their daily life. So that's taken off their plate.
I love that. And I think one of the things that, we had talked about before is the concept of, nurses, once they come into your healthcare system, how do you keep them as a Mercy nurse for life? And I think that really goes back to the thought about the life cycle. And, if you could think about, your vision of what someone's journey with Mercy might be, what might that look like? If a nurse comes into your system at the beginning of their career, what could you imagine their journey with you ultimately being? What kinds of change are you enabling them to have?
So it's as a basic human premise. I want a mercy nurse to be happy with what they're doing, no matter what they're doing, no matter how they do it. And I want them to go home, and this is very important to me at the end of the day, not so wrung out from the work, but energized by the work. And I don't think we've had that in a very long time in nursing because of our workload, those lack of standardization efforts that occur. And so most people are thinking that introducing all this change into a health system is going to be more disruptive. I think technology and analytics can help us manage this in a way where the nurses take back control over their entire life. And I'm very passionate about not sending people home to their family completely worn out, because that's no life. And I wouldn't want to do that as a nurse. And so how do we help control as much as we can as chief nursing officers across our system in Mercy, and give that nurse the ability to be the best that they can be? And that takes a lot of planning and work. And it's not just one person. It's certainly not me. It's an entire team that is focused on that exact vision every single day. It's what gives them life when they come to work, knowing that they're impacting our nurses who are touching our patients. And that's going to be key to everything we design, or everything we're going to talk about from here on forward, is that perspective of sending people home better than when they came to work.
I love that. Cool. So then I think from there, that kind of sets up, what did you actually do? How did this actually come to life? And what are some of the changes you've made? So, I think most people on the call are probably familiar with the Mercy, but they're, a top 5 healthcare system. We've been really excited to work with Betty Jo on this. And I think it's been, I think sometimes you often hear, well, workforce transformation or making a big change is impossible in a big environment. There's too much bureaucracy, there's too many moving parts, there's too many dependencies. And I think, the fact that Betty Jo's been able to drive such an initiative at a system like Mercy, and their, willingness to embrace innovation there, I think is a great testament that this is something that, many healthcare systems could be thinking about doing, and really excited for them to be leading the way on this. So, kind of getting into it, I think when we talk about this idea of enabling workforce flexibility, it starts kind of with this concept of workforce layers. So I think, Betty Jo, if you want to talk a little bit through how you're thinking about that at Mercy, and how you've envisioned and your team's envisioned, reconstructing what this workforce looks like.
Yeah, somebody had a great comment in the chat that I want to bring out. So Jackie says, becoming more simplified actually leads to less stress. And that is a 100% true statement. And I'll tell you why. It takes a lot of time to think about how to design the methodology, the technology for your workforce that's actually simpler for them, but it's way complex in the background. And that's why technology has to be added in. For those of you who signed up for this webinar, it was a little weird, probably looking at the title, talking about mental health and wellness with technology, right, in the background. And that's exactly the comment, why we did it this way, because you can't do it without it. Doing manual processes to add this in actually will make it more complex on the front line. So making it so simple for them to work and be fulfilled at Mercy is the overall key. So that's a great comment. So as you're looking at these workforce layers, I want you to know this took, in the middle of a pandemic, but it took us 2 years to get here. This wasn't an easy vision or philosophy, because it needed input from all of our chief nursing officers across the system. And they are some great thinkers, by the way. So the other thing I will say is having a leadership team that's able to bend their mind around new concepts and things, and see the value of continuing to work through it. It did not start out looking like this. It was completely disjointed at the beginning, but here's where we've landed. And my guess is we're not done. My guess is this will be forever changing as the workforce needs change. So having good definitions and knowing where you're starting is going to be key. So when you look at this, most chief nursing officers and most nursing leaders around the country are living in that bottom layer that's the biggest, and that's our core. That is our most reliable. It's the FTEs. It's what we count on every day. It's what gives us great comfort that when we are designing a happy workforce, that we have enough people to be able to meet the demands of our patients. It's our full-time coworkers, part-time. It's our PRNs that are unit-based that we can count on for one shift on one unit every single day. And it's that part-time flex position. And we've added, even into our core base layer, we've added some flexibility. And that part-time flex layer is not just part-time, but it's part-time around hours that they want to work. So they might work in the middle of a shift. For example, you might have a young mother who wants to work from 10 to 2, can give you their all from 10 to 2, right? That's the mental health and wellness part of it. I didn't say part-time is a 12-hour shift that you can't accomplish. It can be 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, or 12 hours, right? If that's what meets the need here and there. But it's really about taking a look at the hours and not the shift. And before I move into these other workforce layers, the basic premise of this workforce model is not shifts, it's hours. And that's a completely different concept from where we've been. The other reason you need technology to pull this off, because it's about collectible hours. It's not about, I've got 4 people working from 7A to 7P, right? It's really around, I need 48 hours filled. How I do it depends on what my workforce needs are and how can I design patient care to meet the workforce needs. Here's the other concept that's very important here. It's about designing the workplace to fit what our current workforce wants. For example, we all know people do not want to work night shift necessarily. So we have to incentivize people to work night shift. And so when you take a look at designing it, compensation may be a piece of it, but the other piece is the work environment. How do you design then the most important aspects of care to happen during the day and still make sure safety and things occur at night? So it's about meeting in the middle, the patient's always at the center, and designing the workforce and what goes on the in the healthcare environment to meet the needs 100%. And that's a total 360 from where we normally think about it, because it's designed in hours, not in shifts. So that's the basis of all of this. And that part-time flex really got us thinking in Mercy about, do we really need maximum productivity and everybody starting at 7 a.m.? Actually, we don't, right? Or do we need everybody working till 7:30 at night? Where are our hotspots? And if we can't solve, if the workforce isn't filling in around our hotspots where we need the majority, how do we design it so it's meeting the needs of the workforce? Rather than going at it from one direction, saying we've got to meet patient needs. So it's a completely flexible mindset around how we're thinking about workforce. That part-time flex is the basis of it. The other thing, I'm going to pivot around the flex in the middle. It's our middle layer, but I'm going to go up to the top. Most of us are living in the world of agency today. If you're anywhere near a nursing unit, there's external agency that fills a great need. By the way, in Mercy, we have a great external agency partner, but it doesn't meet all your needs. The problem with external agency, number one, has been the high cost. But in addition to that, it's the inflexibility of contracting and being able to move them. Once you contract them for so many weeks, they're in your workforce, which during a pandemic wasn't bad because we had some big needs. But as you start to pivot out of the pandemic done right, you're going to want to look at a more flexible agency layer that meets your needs. We're lucky in Mercy. We're in split up into 3 regions. And so we're looking at an internal agency concept that allows nurses, if they want to travel and see some places or experience different things, we're looking at internal agency contracts that are maybe a little more flexible. So when you take a look at the workforce layers, we're starting to launch that now. And it's not just a pandemic thing. It's going to be the way our workforce is designed moving forward. So that's going to be a big piece of the way we think about workforce. Then I'm going to drop down into that middle section. And I will tell you, this is the most flexible, technology-driven, complicated piece of the workforce. It's also going to fill the hours that you need. So while it may be complicated to administer, Once you start thinking about the definitions of how you use nurses in this layer and how you're going to make sure that they show up at the right place at the right time for the right patients, this layer is key to being able to maneuver your workforce for their mental wellness and your patient benefits. And so this flex layer for Mercy has 3 main layers. It's a local float pool. Those are your coworkers that don't mind working on different units in one hospital. So flexible to a point. The second is your regional float pool that can work in multiple hospitals in one region. For example, in our East region here in Mercy, we have a fantastic regional float pool that's very robust, and they move not only locations throughout all of our hospitals, but they work on different units in each of those hospitals. And in that regional model, all 5 hospitals are close enough that they can help each other out in that regional float model. Both the local float pool and the regional float pool are hired internal to Mercy. They are 100% FTE benefited Mercy coworkers. The thing we're adding in here that's going to take the most amount of flexibility and technology is the thinking behind this workforce called the gig per diem. And it is, oh great, I forgot we had a slide, don't we, Alex? But it's going to take a lot of thinking, and this is where we brought in partners to help us, right? This layer, I will tell you, has been through every CNO. They're thinking, how are we going to administer this? And it's got about 26 great CNOs thinking into how we might use this gig workforce. And we're not done. We're still thinking on it, but it's going to need a lot of technology to be able to deploy it consistently, reliability wise, and driving quality, because it is your most transient worker in and out of the health system. So one of the first things we did was define what this was going to be, and more importantly, what it isn't, because I think that's really, really important. And it's a nurse, and you can read it. It's a nurse interested in occasional shifts. So it's interesting. It is a regional strategy as well. Gig does not extend out of the region today. Not that it couldn't, but it wasn't in our thinking. It's still in a regional concept at this point. But it's a nurse that's interested in occasional shifts. It might be a nurse that wants to stay home and just wants to pick up hours to stay current until their family is a little older. It might be a father who is staying home to deal with other things, education, that needs those just occasional shifts. Or it might be a nurse that works for another hospital in our region that wants to do their extra shifts with us, right? And so one of the things that was important to us is that we didn't lose our value of what being a Mercy nurse means. So it is very special to be a Mercy nurse. And how do they get enculturated into what that means? And so there's a large culture piece that we're putting into this gig workforce. So they understand that when they're working in Mercy, there's a different level of expectation when they're a Mercy nurse. So we decided, and this was through hours and hours of agonizing with HR and our chief nursing officers, the qualifications and hiring processes would be consistent with our core Mercy coworkers. And that's a very important point, but it sends a message that you might be giving us occasional hours, but you're still a Mercy nurse. We go through some talent interviews to see what your talents are, where you're going to be most successful. Also, Mercy fit into culture. And so they are actually hired into a 0 FTE. They go through consistent onboarding, and they're brought in as a Mercy nurse. The difference is they use a mobile app. They're going to be using a mobile app to pick up their shifts. So we're going to make it very easy for them to see what shifts are available in Mercy and pick them up through technology. And there you can see it. Right?
I think we have a slide for that too.
Yep. Yep. The other thing that was important was if they're going to be a part of our nursing workforce, that our internal coworkers had the same ability to use technology. So today we have a staffing and scheduling system, right, that is released onto desktops and computers, and it's not as easy on a mobile phone. Going forward, our Mercy nurses will be able to pick up their shifts, their scheduling, as well as any extra shifts through the mobile app that you just saw on the other side. So it's going to be very easy for our internal coworkers to pick up the shifts they want, and very easy to push it to our external gig coworkers, but it's the same platform. They're working in the same technology. They have the same advantages. But obviously, if you're a full-time Mercy nurse, you're going to get first pick over the shifts and things internal. And then the gig coworkers are going to be pushed the shifts that are available, and they will pick them up in the app. But it all comes back to having a great staffing and scheduling system that can not only enhance, but provide the flexibility to our coworkers. So there's where the technology comes in to suit their lifestyle.
One thing I feel like I'm, getting from this, it sounds like there's a couple main benefits you were looking for. And one would be, being able to kind of drive retention and expand your available pool. So, what we've seen in a lot of places is when, nurses get burned out, they just leave. It sounds like this is an opportunity for even folks who might be burned out to say, well, I'm burned out, but I don't want to be totally out of the market. What's a way for me to stay involved? So that was kind of a core kind of pillar of this project, it sounds like.
Core belief. Yep. 100%.
Yep. The other part that I think I'm hearing is, as far as recruiting new nurses, it sounds like you're now able to kind of, advertise Mercy as a hospital that is putting nurses first and, driving flexibility. So, even when someone's coming on, maybe they're working somewhere else and they're just picking up a shift or two with you. It's almost like you get to kind of, show off that you're putting culture first, even for nurses that maybe thought they were only going to do one shift here and there. But is the hope that, they end up kind of deciding that they like this way of things better, and you are able to be more competitive in the market.
Absolutely. Competitive by meeting their needs, right? That's the goal, 100%. And we have such a great nursing culture, as well as great nursing leaders out there on our units that we're hoping they will stay on, and they may change very easily between all these workforce layers. The other benefit is everybody's hired into Mercy, so moving between the workforce layers is very easy. You may have a nurse that does gig for half the year and wants to take an internal travel assignment for the other half of the year. So that flexibility exists because they're all hired into Mercy. It's not just hey, we got a couple shifts we need covered and we're pushing it out to you. So I think that's the other benefit. It allows them to move as their life changes.
So I want to go back just to thinking a little bit about, because I think this concept might need a little more explanation for folks to understand, the idea of, nurses having a mobile app and being able to kind of enter, a marketplace for shifts. How are you thinking about rolling this out to your team? How are you hoping they're going to use the application? What was the reception to nurses? How are your teams feeling about kind of this new way of operation, and how are they using the app today?
So we started small, right? We started on one unit. Technology always makes us a little nervous when we introduce it into, working with people's time and money, right? When I became a nursing leader, one of the first things I learned was don't mess with people's time or money. This messes with both. So, my propensity for change is fairly large. And so, we had to stop, and we wanted to try it on one unit. And within that unit, we released our incentivized shifts out there to this unit who's internal. And what we saw was our fill rate went up about 15% on our incentivized shifts. And the other thing we saw is, believe it or not, it brought down costs, because the app in the background was taking it out of the desktop and allowing people to react more real time to the shifts that were there. And it allows them to see what's available to them much earlier. And so there's a compensation strategy behind it. The nurses are more satisfied. They're picking up shifts more real time. And when you take a look at it, it allows us to be more effective with our incentivized shifts. So if we have something that absolutely needs covered within 4 hours, it's going to have the ability to post a higher incentivized shift versus things that are a little bit more long-term that we know we need. So it helps us adjust to the coworker as well. It's really built with a ton of math in the background, Alex, which is key, right? To incentivize behavior and get the shift covered in the right way. The other thing I like about it, and it isn't shown here, it shows the total money that the nurse can make for the shift with the incentive placed on it. So it doesn't just say, like here it says $15 per hour bonus. It also tells you exactly how much money you're going to make for that shift. So if you pick up an 8-hour shift, it does have a bonus on it. It gives you that total money that you'll be taking home that day. And that helps people understand, right, the additional money they're going to make. So there's a lot of great things that are built into the technology platform, as well as a very complicated math package that's going to be in the background. And it looks a lot like the Uber app, right? The demand, right? The supply demand concept with the math in the background to help us be better at incentivizing our nurses in the right way.
I think the other thing I like that you mentioned incentivizing in the right way, because what we found, so, this is the trusted app. And, one of the core tenets behind developing this was this idea that, money does matter, but the other thing that matters is working the kinds of shifts that makes sense to them. And, not wading through a sea of open shifts and, having to kind of scroll through the first 10 and, you don't want any of them, so you just shut it down. Nurses that are onboarded to this app set up their preferences, what days, what times, what shifts, and really kind of get down into the weeds of what are the shifts that they actually want to work. So when they log in and they see what's available to them that day, in real time, hey, maybe I'm thinking, opportunistically, I've got some free time tomorrow, what's up? They can open it up and they'll see just the things that meet their preferences. And we've found, and, I don't know if you've seen this or not, Betty Jo, but, we've seen that oftentimes, nurses aren't necessarily looking for the highest paid shift. It's, how am I finding the best shift for what my schedule is like this week? So, hospitals can kind of save money in that sense too.
But if they are looking for money, remember we talked about what nurses are looking for. Some are looking for compensation, right? Some are looking for shift, right? The shifts they want. They can just open up their preferences and see whatever they want. If they want to make more money, they'll widen their preferences, right? And if they really want the convenience of working when they want, they're going to narrow it down and take what they want. So it gives them the power right there on their phones to control their life, which is work-life balance.
Exactly. I see a question coming in from Tammy asking about how salaries for all ends fall across comparative industry percentiles. Is that something that you had to think about when you were designing this?
So interesting. That's a great question because it's caused the most debate and consternation, right? What's the compensation strategy behind that entire workforce layer that you've seen, right? And so there is that balance. Tammy's 100% right. There's that balance. First of all, you have to be market competitive for your core. 100% that you have to be competitive in that core lane. That's your basis. That's your largest group of coworkers. But then you have to add in that flexibility of the gig and the regional float pool, and the compensation strategy has to flow from there. It's got to remain competitive. And what you're asking people, if you're asking them to be more flexible, there's more compensation on it, but it still stays in that range. And I know where you're going. How far out of whack do you get between coworkers, your core coworkers, your gig, and then your agency? Obviously, your agency is doing the most going across. Obviously, that strategy is set separately from everything else, right? We're paying the most for external agency, internal agency. We're paying in a different way. There's stipends and things that have to go into effect. But then when you drop into that flexible layer, that compensation strategy moves, but it still stays within the range that we're not outpacing our current coworkers for what we're asking them to do. Don't forget that with more flexibility comes increased compensation, right? So if you're willing to do more, you're going to make a little more. And so we stay within that compensation strategy, but remaining market competitive is key. There's nothing that's going to replace your core coworkers.
I saw one other question come in that I think is relevant, and it's asking, what is your technology stack you're using to enable all of this?
Yes, so it's interesting. This is we have a whole workforce team, and they are a fantastic team that supports our entire ministry to keep all of our hospitals within the boundaries of where we need to be. So first of all, hats off. I know my workforce team's out there somewhere, but they're really helping us hardwire into technology the things that we decide as CNOs and leaders that we want in there. And there's some regional flexibility, right? So there's regional markets, right? We go clear from Oklahoma, clear here to St. Louis. So that's a wide market. So there's some regional differences that we're able to program in as well. But today, we use a staffing and scheduling system called Smart Square. And we're getting ready to move to Chronos Dimensions that has just a little bit more flexibility for where we want to go. So we're looking at technology to support the strategy. Very important. We did not go after technology until we had the vision and strategy set. And the app that we're using comes from Trusted. So that's our partners that we've heavily invested in that gig workforce lane. And so marrying up the technology so they work together are key so people get paid correctly, which will all blow up in our faces if that doesn't happen. So we're merging the technology that we use for staffing and scheduling with our app that we're using for flexibility and compensation in the background. That was a good question because that can get pretty confusing.
All right. So, I think we talked about this a little bit, but just thinking about, obviously technology is the core, but I liked what you said about doing the workforce planning behind the scenes and then thinking about the change management. I'm wondering if you might just be able to talk through a little bit, how you've approached this from a rollout standpoint, and what are you seeing as the pillars for this being successfully adopted?
So I would say slowly and planfully, because we didn't want to bite off more than we could chew at one time. So the great thing is with 3 regions, we have something that underlays the workforce strategy that you saw with a change management plan. And one of the things that we have underlaying all of it is skill mix. We all worked on skill mix during the pandemic. So that's a piece of it. We're looking at the healthcare delivery model and how we change that up between nurse practitioners, RNs, LPNs, and then our UAPs, unlicensed personnel. That's underlying all of this to help us build a stronger workforce and a more team environment. So that's one thing. The other thing that sits in the middle of it is a professional practice development center by region that sits in each region, so we can support nurses once we bring them into Mercy. So it'd be really great to think that flexibility and compensation is going to keep them set for life. We also know what nurses are craving is really career development. Some of them may want to change careers. What's really hard is you might be an ICU nurse today, but maybe you want to try out being a nurse in the OR. And so how do you make the leap and stay in Mercy rather than go outside of Mercy? This professional practice development center is our onboarding. It houses the guts for the way we think about staffing and scheduling. It also has professional career advancement and culture fit all built in. So once you're inside of Mercy and you hire on and you onboard through this center, you have a complete center that's devoted to your professional development, regardless of what you want to be. That's also key. That's the other thing that's going to sustain us, is making sure we're meeting nurses where they want to practice, how they want to practice. And so that's the other piece you couldn't see. And then that third pillar, right? We've got really skill mix, professional practice development center. The third is this technology platform for staffing, scheduling, and this gig workforce. So we're really blending underneath a larger vision and strategy other than just workforce, but it's how do you sustain the workforce, which is what you're asking, and the change management around it. We started on one unit. To be honest with you, we started in one unit, started internal. We've now opened it up in one hospital to multiple units, right, internal. The key around change management is never introduce something better to the outside than you have for your internal coworkers. So that's the key. Your core is still your mainstay, and making sure that you're meeting their needs first and then taking it to the outside and bringing everybody together. That's the change management piece of this.
I love that. And then, I think as we've been partnering together over the last year or so, I think the thing that's been, I think, very meaningful as it relates to, mental health and wellness is I think some organizations may think that's a nice to have, culture is a nice to have. There's a lot of talk about, how important it is. But really, when you fix things for the workforce, you do actually see, meaningful gains to bottom line, meaningful gains to retention, and actually having, the workforce stay engaged. So, I think that's been something we've been excited to see. Are you thinking as you're looking forward to kind of your next steps, next phases, what kinds of improvements are you hoping to get out of this?
So while we are keeping track of all of this in the background because it's the core to driving where we want to be, really just keeping that focus on what the nurse wants will actually have everything else show up. I mean, making sure your strategies align. So if you need to make changes, right where to go into that workforce layer to make the changes if something isn't quite right. But focusing on what the nurse needs out of this while we're meeting what we need out of it is really the key. And then these numbers show up. Done right, these numbers appear. You're not focusing on numbers, which I think is the total key to building a workforce that's strong, delivers high quality, and is happy when they go home at night.
Awesome. I saw some questions come through. We have time for a couple before we announce the winner. One thing that was an interesting question that I saw was, I hear some discussion around picking up shifts. What does dropping shifts look like? And that's a question from Ashley Rayner.
That's a really good question. Everything done within the app, right? So it's really easy to do in the app. And don't forget, it goes right back into our staffing and scheduling system so we can source it in a different way. So if somebody does drop it, no big deal. We can go back in and source it in a different way. And the app with the math in the background will be able to source another candidate. So the technology is way faster than we can do manually within our health system. So we've done two things. We've automated it and made it faster. We've got better math in the background, and it allows us to react quicker because we have both those things.
I think that agility piece is really important, knowing that, demand volatility is only going to increase, and, you need something that can kind of be faster than people in terms of looking at it. So I think that has been core.
Somebody had a great question. Do informatics nurses support your technology implementation? 100% yes. As a matter of fact, we just hired our nurse leader of informatics in the last couple of weeks. She's been working with us in a dual role. She really has a passion around this, and we just hired her on as our lead in all of this because as CNOs, we can be a little bit dangerous. So having her take a look at it from all perspectives, and also how do you build in clinical decision support tools into Epic to help nurses who maybe don't work every day, going to be key to that healthy work environment. Somebody asked about EAP or employee satisfaction surveys. Our employee satisfaction surveys, we're able to customize them, and we do them quarterly. And so we are going to be asking specific questions as this gig workforce layer comes up about flexibility and compensation to make sure we're getting the voice. And it will also be released to our gig workers because they're Mercy nurses, right? So they'll have the opportunity to weigh in, and we'll get that collective voice back. Yes, good question.
I think we have time for one final question. If we didn't get to your question, we'll try to follow up via email afterwards. But Jean asked, does gig have different levels of experience or unions or unit specific, i.e. IC or ED?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes. In fact, we're wrestling with those specifics right now. That was a very timely question. So yes, it has different requisites. So the technology that we're managing, every single nurse, whether you're internal, gig, internal agency, is into our Works platform. So we have a full accounting and inventory of every nurse who touches a patient and nurse in Mercy, what they're able to do, what their licensure is, their certifications, their competencies. It's all managed in one system. So we only send shifts out to people who are competent to work on those units. Again, done through technology rather than manually. Yes, 100%. Good question.
I saw one more. I said that was the last one, but this was an interesting question to me is how are you thinking about acuity-based staffing ratios? Is that something that went into your consideration?
That's interesting. Nobody has a good acuity ratio tool yet, but rather than thinking of acuity changing, we're thinking of workload in Mercy. So acuity is important because it tells you how sick the patient is, but it doesn't tell you how much workload the nurse has to do to take care of that sick patient. So starting the shift to workload is really where we're heading. It's not incorporated yet, but it is on our roadmap to think about staffing by workload, and workload looks different in an ICU than maybe it does, on a med surg unit. So that concept of workload is going to be important, but it's going to have to interface with our EMR to get information back out of it. So we're very rudimentary on this, but not done working with Epic on how we might be able to incorporate that. That's actually an excellent question.
All right. Well, I think, we were running down on the wire. So, I think the last thing to do is announce who is going on their next vacations. So, I would like to congratulate, if you're still on the call, like to give you a little round of applause. And for everyone else, if you want to learn more, you can visit us at works.ai. Happy to talk to you more in depth about the trusted app, or find Betty Jo or myself on LinkedIn. We love talking about this stuff. And if we didn't get a chance to answer your question, we'll follow up via email. So that's it. That's all we got for you. And I just wanted to thank everyone, and especially thank you, Betty Jo. You've been a great partner to work with. And we're going to be having another conversation this summer as she goes full system wide, and we'll talk about some of the additional learnings that have been gained there. So it would love to invite everyone to come.
Thank you, guys. It's been my pleasure.